So without the wisdom and the knowledge, the tools don't matter. The precious thing is God himself. It's the knowledge, the salvation, the sanctification, and the evangelization that comes from God himself. So the parable gets in on this, what we're weighing out. That is the talents we're talking about. And then we end up in an A-B comparison of what's going on with these talents that we're dealing with. This precious substance. And, just to throw this in, if it's true it's a precious substance, maybe the precious thing that Pastor Chris has given is different than me, and mine is different than Josh or Morgan's. It doesn't necessarily have to be all the same thing, other than it is God himself in some form working through us. So those talents could be anything. Catch this as we read too. So he who received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents. So he multiplied. What did he multiply? The same thing he got. If whatever the gift, whatever the Spirit was working, that's what he multiplied. Not money, not opportunity. He multiplied the opportunity for God himself. 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I gave you 1 or 2 kroner. Now you will be made ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Not your joy, the joy of the Lord. What an amazing phrase is that you and I have joy, but if it's not the joy of the Lord, it's very temporary. It's not very deep. If it's the joy of the Lord, it's eternal. An amazing thing. He also had received 2 talents, came and said, this must have been the guy with the toonies, Kelly. He who had 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, guess what? Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Now the parable says each servant received a measure of the preciousness of God up to his ability, according to his ability. As a believer, we should be grateful about this. Maybe somebody else in here is a super virtuoso in what God does. And we feel like a really small fry in a big sea, or a small fish or whatever in a big sea. But according to their own ability, and we should be grateful for that, because God gives us enough that we can handle at that time. He gives us enough we can handle at that time. And then he gives us more when we can handle that. Jesus says something that Paul parallels to the churches. In 1 Corinthians 12:11, he says, all these are empowered, and speaking of members of the church, by one and the same Spirit, who apportions to each one individually as he wills. It's God's choice what we get, and it's a perfect choice. Not too much, not too little. Live up to what we have. Few insights on this. It takes as much commitment. If you look at the guy who had 5 made 5 more. The guy who had 2 made 2 more. So in mathematical terms, what did they do? I know it's really tough. They doubled it, right? And here's the interesting thing. One guy has a lot less than the other guy, but he doubled it. And to God, the value is just the same. It was just as big a deal that 2 became 2 more as 5 became 5 more. How do we know that? It's the exact same words. Well done, good and faithful servant, 2 or 5. Enter into the joy of your Lord. It's the same thing, the same value, that is in there, exactly the same. Our endowment of God's wealth isn't static. That's the second thing. You may sit there and we may think, man, I'm little more than filthy rags that we were talking about earlier, but you have something God has put in you. God has given you some level of baby steps at least. And he says, if you do okay with that, with the precious substance of God, I will give you more. As you're trained up in using a little, I will give you more. Verse 24. Then he who had received the 1 talent, here we go, the other side of the story, came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, and gathered where you had not scattered seed. And I was afraid. And I went and I hid your talent. At least he got that right. It wasn't his talent. It was the Lord's talent. In the ground, look. There you have what is yours. You're welcome. But his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant. Ooh, change of tone going on here. You knew that I reap. You knew, and that's very important, we know the word knew. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at the coming I would have received back my own with interest. Whatever the precious substance, if money is our visual aid, so be it in there. The idea, though, it's coming down to this, is a different tone. Not just with the Lord, but with the servant. Did you catch it? Now, beside the obvious making excuses for what he did, what does this servant do different than the others? Well, one thing he does is he focuses on himself. He focuses on himself. If you follow the conversation with the first two, it's centered around the Lord's talents. Lord, you remember these talents you gave me? Well, I doubled them. Now I've got these, all about the talents. Well, the focus with this servant is about his comfort and security. Lord, I know what you're like, and I was afraid. I was afraid for me. So, Lord, since it was risky to invest this, for my own security, I went and buried this so it wouldn't get lost. Now, I wouldn't gather any interest, but I didn't lose it either. It's another way of saying, Lord, you gave me something, and I doubted that you would ever give me anything again, or I doubted that you were going to help me out, so I just looked out for myself. At some point, you just look out for yourself. And when it goes on to talk about, Lord, why did you do this? Why you were afraid? Well, God, the way I see you is you are a hard man reaping where you don't sow. And this is really interesting because we know what the parable's about. It's about the return of Jesus in the day of judgment. So this is Jesus talking about himself. And that sounds like a pretty harsh light, doesn't it? I'm telling you that I'm this hard man that reaps where I don't sow. It kind of sounds like a bandit or something. Well, we go back to the original Greek. The word also means stern. So God is telling us, I'll let you know this, I'm stern. I'm stern. I'm very firm. And he has to be. If we think about it, the main definition, we could take two words, I think, that kind of interplay with each other. When you talk about God, God is holy, but in that very holiness, God is perfect. God is perfect. So you have all these things going on to make a perfect balance. I'm going to lose my cube of water here so you can see. You have all of these things going on in balance. If you're going to have perfect love, you better have perfect justice. Because you know what? We talk about unconditional love, but love that has no standards, love that has no accountability, it's really toxic. It's sure not perfect. And there are other things that need to balance. We need to balance purpose and healing I'm sick, heal me. Yeah, but what's the purpose? Is there a purpose behind why you are sick right now? Or the balance of just perfect balance. If things are not in balance, the only other option is chaos. Tossed to and fro. Perfection is going to offer perfect balance as well. A perfect God is going to be all of those perfect balances. One thing he will not be is a pushover. God may be love, but he's not a pushover. Galatians 6:6 says, let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Whatever one sows, that he will also reap. We can sow, we could measure a lot of things with the talent. Maybe they're not such precious things. The verse is saying, whatever you measure out, whatever you sow, whatever you're balancing in your measure, that's what you're going to reap. It only makes sense, doesn't it? It only makes sense. You reap the talents you sow.